This just happened at the United Nations. And it certainly is a moment in the whole discussion of where the U.S. is right now vis-a-vis the European allies and Ukraine. There was a resolution that passed at the United Nations marking the 3 years of the war. And the U.S. did not vote yes. The U.S. voted no. And among the other countries that voted no were North Korea, Russia, Hungary, and Belarus, and the list goes on. And what this resolution said was that Russia invaded Ukraine and also did have language in there that suggested that Russia should leave Ukraine and it should go back to the borders before Russia invaded. This is really amazing that the U.S. is now on record in the United Nations on the side of North Korea and Russia when it comes to language. No, it's just a resolution marking it. It doesn't really do anything. It was the American resolution. This was a U.S. drafted resolution that did not identify Russia as the aggressor. That was a separate one that they tried, which didn't pass. You're right. There was a separate resolution. But as the language is upgraded, the U.S. says we're not going to agree to this. That's exactly right. We're not going to call Russia the aggressor. Which is why they voted no. At the UN. Yeah.
But I think when you take that in conjunction with Vance's remarks at the Munich Security Conference, which is, of course, a very important sort of international event, where he really focused on sort of these cultural issues and laid into Europe quite strongly, what it seems like we're seeing is a repositioning of the United States away from the nation's traditional allies in Europe and towards Russia. And it's just, it's remarkable.
Well, yeah, and I think that's totally right when you look at the big picture. In the immediate term, what Trump is trying to do is get a deal. Is get a deal to end the war, which he did, to be fair, he did campaign on, but the way he's approaching it is going all in on Russian language, frankly, Russian propaganda. And it almost reminds me of back after January 6th, where it's like what you saw, what actually happened, didn't really happen in order to get what he wants.
It's a kind of Jedi mind trick to get you to forget the facts that we all kind of saw ahead of us that obviously showed Russia's aggression leading to this conflict. I think Lisa's right on the big picture. It is a repositioning, but it's a repositioning in which the Trump administration has sought to do because that kind of transactional nature, we don't know who's our friend, who's our foe, it can change day to day, is what he sees as his negotiating power. But I think what the larger kind of world sees as just kind of Trump's personality, right? Like the flattery works, that he could have him turn against others, but he's been fairly consistent in terms of parroting Russian language, as you've said, which has caused alarms, I think, even within his own party. The only thing I would add, though, is if I remember back to the electorate in last year, there was a big turn against foreign aid, against investing in Ukraine. And I think even the framing of that as European interests rather than an American interest is one that Donald Trump has seized on to be able to create a wedge between his kind of portion of the electorate, which I don't think is just a MAGA base, but I think it's kind of a cross-demographic one that has not seen this as the biggest priority.
I think that's a really important point, and I don't think it's something that we can lose sight of. That, America first, whatever that means, depending on what flavor of it you're talking about, does have support beyond the base.
That's why I think the distinction matters about, does Ukraine feel like an American interest, right? Can America first can lead you to invest and support them? That's not what they've done.
But is there a way to follow up on those campaign promises, pull back from Ukraine, and not be falling all over himself to parrot Russia? Just listen to what Steve Witkoff said. Well, actually, first let's listen to Pete Hegseth, followed by Steve Witkoff, who's the president's envoy to the Middle East, but he's involved in these issues.
Fair to say Russia attacked unprovoked into Ukraine 3 years ago tomorrow.
Fair to say it's a very complicated situation.
The war didn't need to happen. It was provoked. It doesn't necessarily mean it was provoked by the Russians. There were all kinds of conversations back then about Ukraine joining NATO. The president has spoken about this. That didn't need to happen.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right, it's giving away the game entirely. And at least it is pretty explicit, at least it's pretty obvious what's happening. Some of this, I fear, is about illiteracy on the part of the voters, not knowing, for example, about the spending that's going to Ukraine that's actually funding American technology, right, funding American manufacturing plants. And by the time you do learn those facts, it's too late.
But I do think, look, not to out us here, Dana, but you and I are both old enough to remember when Mitt Romney got up and said Russia was the central, enemy of the United States. Do you remember that too? Okay, I'm outing everybody at the table.
Brian's read about it in the history.
Yeah, but and so to see the silence from so many, the vast majority of Republicans in Congress, people who have been such staunch, foreign policy hawks for so long, who have raised alarms about Russia for over a decade, is just unbelievably striking.